Great. Good morning, everybody. It is really my great pleasure to be here. Thank you to President Holton, to the staff and faculty here at NYU Poly. It is just a great honor to be able to spend this morning with you, especially in this age where we are talking a lot about cyber and cybersecurity. It is one of the topics that resonates with me on a daily basis, whether I am at work or at play. And I'll talk about that some throughout the time here with you today. We got to get my slides up. So I'm going to spend a little time today with you talking about, next slide, talk a little bit about the current environment, talk about why it's important for us to care about the current environment. A question that I am asked quite often in fora like this is what keeps me up at night. So I'm going to start off answering that question. And then the time has come, and then I'll spend some time talking about threats and emerging threats in the environment and some recommendations that I would have on things we should think about as we look at how to be able to mitigate against them. So what's the current environment look like? You can't open today's newspapers without seeing some entity, some infrastructure that has been infiltrated by some malicious behavior almost on a daily basis now. We're not just talking about small companies, we're talking about big companies. And by the way, those are just the ones you hear about. There are many, many, many that I'd posit that we don't get to hear about for a variety of different reasons. The environment is also such that we are tremendously dependent on technology for our livelihood. How many people have a piece of technology with them today? All of our hands are going to go up, right? And when I travel away from my workplace, I can have up to 5 different mobile devices with me for the many different types of communication. That's a whole nother briefing and a whole nother problem because it really shouldn't be 5. And we're working hard to reduce that number. But I can't live without it. I'm constantly got something in my hand when I'm outside of the workplace. And inside the workplace, I'm constantly touching different pieces of technology to stay connected and to stay informed. So we've got a world that's critically dependent on technology. We've got bad guys who would want to do us harm for a variety of different reasons that I'll talk about. And so what keeps me up at night? So this is probably the appropriate time to get in the one dig I need to get in. So what was probably not in my bio is that I'm a lifelong Baltimorean. And what's probably also not in my bio is that I was a junior Oriole. So what did not keep me up last night was the score of that game. Go Birds. Okay, I'm done. I've got it off my chest. 10-6 if anybody didn't get to come back from the, yes, okay. So what's my role in this cyberspace, information assurance space? At NSA, we are responsible for protecting and defending national security systems. And as President Holton talked about, we also provide significant support in assisting key partners like the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, partnering with them to provide our expertise and our technical assistance as they serve in their roles in the areas of working with critical infrastructure sectors to help them understand and then better protect their infrastructures. And why do we care? We care because as a nation, from a U.S. government perspective, the vast majority of the infrastructure that we rely on in order for us to conduct the business of government is owned and operated by private industry. So we have a vested interest in making sure that those infrastructures are as secure as they can be. What keeps me up at night? Honestly, 2 things. One is that I have a workforce that's very tired. Workforce is really tired because, this is the heyday, this is the golden age of information assurance and cybersecurity. And that means that we have much more business than we could ever want or comfortably take care of, many more requirements than we can handle, and we are ever dedicated and committed to be able to do our part to help combat some of the significant challenges we find in that space. So I need fresh legs. And I see lots of them here in the room, and hopefully folks that are listening afar who want to look at an opportunity. Certainly at NSA we'd welcome, absolutely, but not just NSA, all over the government, all over private sector. We have a need for professionals who are able to think and to act and to help us to create solutions to some of the tough challenges that we see in the cybersecurity space. So what keeps me up at night is how can I make sure that my workforce stays refreshed and is able to get some time off and come back refreshed and renewed, but also that we can stay on top of the critical problems that the nation has entrusted with us. The other thing that keeps me up at night is that we don't know what we don't know. And so every single day I come in knowing that I have no idea what kind of new problem is going to come my way, that I have no sense of the vulnerability we might find that day or the new threat that might come that might cause us to have to think in some different ways, to act much more quickly than we have historically been accustomed to make tough decisions about investments, both in capabilities today and investments in what we might need in the future. And so those are the two things that really keep me thinking and wanting to be in environments like this where I am confident that as we band together, industry and government and academia, we can solve some of these tough problems. So really the time has come for us as a community to stand up strong and be committed and united and really open in our commitments together to be able to combat some of these really tough challenges. So my responsibilities in information assurance are the national security systems specifically. Those are the authorities that are given to NSA by the President, and that's specifically defined as classified networks and systems, as well as those that might be used for military or intelligence operations. So I'm responsible for, my organization responsible for developing and delivering solutions that can assure the communications that ride in a variety of different means across a number of different networks and environments. We train and develop others across the government to be able to do the type of work that we do so that we can expand our capabilities across the government. So we have things called blue teams that go out and do assessments on the networks and environments of U.S. government entities. We have red teams that sit back and figure out crafty ways that they can, with the permission of the system and network owner, get into those systems, not to demonstrate that we can, but to demonstrate that there's a measure of security that is not in place that needs to be in place. And we provide that assistance literally around the globe. We have folks that are positioned around the globe to be able to provide that support to U.S. government customers and entities. We have a significant role in what we call operational security, OPSEC. That means just being aware that when you are communicating on what you're communicating, and if you're communicating something that needs to be protected, that you're communicating in a way that actually protects those communications. So we have a significant effort and investment in operational security, but in information assurance overall. So NYU Poly, a center of academic excellence with us, and about 140 other colleges and universities. Dr. Mark Althaus here with me today, works on our staff and is our senior executive account leader for the NYU Poly relationship. Mark also works in our mobility area, and he really, any questions on anything I have to say, you should ask Mark. He would be the right person to check into. Next slide. So what's the current state? Where do we currently stand? Let's see, to get a true understanding of the magnitude of the problem that we face, think about how many pieces of technology you rely on a daily basis just to live, to work, to play, to be in school. Most families have multiple computers, and some of the things we don't even think about in the context of relying on technology. But my refrigerator probably has more computer chips in it, than the smartphone or tablet that I walk around with, and that is just growing in magnitude. In fact, by 2015, it is anticipated that there will be twice as many internet devices as there are people in the world. By 2015, that is not so far away. Any device you own provides you great capabilities, but if you think about it from the perspective of the bad guy, it provides yet another attack surface, another mechanism by which to get into your environment, to get information that might be of value to you, and to use it to no good cause. So it's really clear for us that times are very much changing. Consumers are embracing mobile devices and solutions to perform many, many, many time-saving tasks. A couple of statistics. In 2010, internet commerce accounted for $684 billion. or 4.7% of all U.S. economic activity, and this number is growing. In 5 years, AT&T mobile data increased by 20,000%. Cisco projects mobile traffic will increase 18-fold between 2011 and 2016. In 2011, there were 461 mobile phones and tablets sold worldwide, and according to one research firm, there was over 400 petabytes a month in mobile traffic during just the fourth quarter of 2011. That seems astonishing, really, when we think about where we were even 10 years ago when I sat at the White House National Security Council doing cybersecurity policy. And by the way, back then, we were talking about something called the I Love You virus, which some of you may remember or have heard about. And the big targets were academic institutions, big targets. Today, academic institutions remain targets, but easy targets. The bad news, the sad news, is many of the attacks now are going against some of the targets that we have historically not viewed as easy targets, and they are being successful. So the unfortunate truth is that the many applications that we need and we rely on for our livelihood are introduced in the infrastructure, and with them come some goodies, some malware that we often don't even know. We don't even know. I can't tell you how many times my smartphone is updated in a given day. It's invisible to me. And I'm trusting that the service provider of my smartphone has put in place all of the right security measures to make sure only the things that need to be there are there, but I don't know that, and you don't know it either. In the past 18 months, we have seen multiple intrusions into networks and infrastructures. I'm going to give you just a running list. October 2010, NASDAQ, very close to home here. In March of 2011, RSA. In April of 2011, Level 3. May 2011 was a banner month for the bad guys: Sony, Citigroup, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. In June 2011, there was Google. These are all, by the way, publicly announced and available, because I wouldn't tell you anything else. In July of 2011, Booz Allen Hamilton. August 2011, DigiNotar. September 2011, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. October, Sony. November, Adidas. December, Visa and the Chamber of Commerce. January 2012, Symantec. I could go on and on. Right? And if you think about those industries and those companies, these were not small companies. Significant, heavy players in a number of areas that are critical to us. And they themselves were experiencing intrusions into their systems and networks. So I think we all can believe that in many of these instances, by the way, some of these companies were and remain the best in the business from a security perspective. And so what that says is that the bar has been raised as it relates to adversary capabilities and intentions. They're getting much better. They're getting much craftier. They're able to move in a much quieter way. And so we have to be ever more vigilant. And I've already stated that universities are not exempt. And while much of the work that happens in universities by design is to be collaborative and open and sharing, I'll bet that there is information even in university networks that's worth protecting. So it's even more important than ever that even universities are protecting those critical pieces of information. So why is the threat growing? You think back to the 1980s when personal computers were a hobby, then PC viruses were a hobby, and back then mainframes were under some attack, and those systems were being looked at pretty seriously because of the criticality of mainframes to our livelihood. So from the malicious and exploitative side of computing and the internet have really grown in their reliance on it, from a social and commercial, and especially from my perspective, a national security perspective. If you think about, industry can put out a new mobile device about every 9 months. I know, because I have 2 now young adult kids who wanted to swap out their phones regularly. And although business and personal networks may appear secure now, the level and effectiveness of security measures has to be questioned and evaluated on a daily basis, even if you think you're secure right this minute. And in fact, even if you are, You really don't know what change in the technology in our environment or change in adversary behavior might cause you to be not secure in the very next hour. So the hard truth is that the more technology we use, the more we need to protect it. Some estimates are that 1 million new samples of malware are detected every month. And the sophistication, as I've stated, of the malware is growing exponentially while the life cycle is rapidly decreasing, which means it's harder and harder to be able to track emerging malware and to prevent attacks. So why is the threat growing? Because the more technology we use, the more we need to protect it. It's really a fairly simple equation. The more opportunity, the more reliance we have on technology, the more opportunity there is for those that would want to take advantage of it and to be able to do so. And we see increased investments by malicious actors in honing their skills and capabilities and actually demonstrating some in test environments, but many, many, many in real environments. So today I want to talk a little bit about emerging threats, really as the core of my talk, to talk about what is an emerging threat, and I'm going to characterize it in this context as a new technology. I'm going to look at it from a technology perspective and from the perspective of adversary behavior. And I'm going to give you some challenges, give you some of my thinking on what are some things we can do to address some of those challenges. Hopefully leave you with some good things to think about as those of you who are in the field or have opportunities to think about it in the academic environment, but also those of you that are looking to move out of the academic environment into the workplace will have a sense of the kind of challenges we're looking at today and the opportunities that I think will exist for you as you are moving out of this institution and into the work world. So why should we study emerging threats? For me, the bottom line is that I need to get out of what General Alexander, the director of NSA, characterizes as cleanup on aisle 9. And so, though that very simply means a bad thing has happened and now we're just trying to clean it up. And so my task is to get beyond cleanup in aisle 9 and get to the point where we can actually anticipate before that spill happens and be able to stop it from happening in advance. And by the way, all along the way, being able to assure to the customers and the clients who rely on me to be able to communicate safely, be able to assure them that they can continue to do so, even in light of or in spite of adversary attacks against them. Another reason to look at it is to be able to identify adversary tradecraft. We learn a whole lot by watching the behaviors of internet adversaries, bad guys who move around and try to do bad things. We learn a lot about techniques and tactics. We learn a lot about profiles. And we can use that body of information to help us develop defensive measures that posture us as a nation to be better prepared to address them. And so who are the stakeholders? It's really all of us. I mean, I have a list, but I don't need to read through a list. It's anybody who has a reliance on networks and communications. We all have a stake in having some level of assurance as a nation and really as a global body that we can continue to operate safely. We all deserve it. We ought to be standing up strong and demanding it, and we ought to be supporting and working together as a unit to ensure that we can have it. So in the context of emerging threats, I'm going to talk about, you can hit the next. I'm going to talk about the threats that fall into one of or both categories. We have these technological threats and behavioral that I just talked to you. From a technological perspective, I'm speaking specifically of those threats that are driven by either an evolving or new or anticipated or existing technology, to include everything that surrounds that technology, the standards, the protocols, from a hardware and a software perspective. And then on the behavioral side, looking specifically at threats that are driven by changes in behaviors, whether it be tactics or intentions or capabilities, looking at the practices, looking at the operating norms, and then looking at regulatory regimes, which there are not very many in cyberspace, right? Because the beauty of cyberspace for many is that it provides an anonymity. And so the need for laws and rules, certainly from the perspective of those that might want to do harm, is just, it's not there, right? Because they can hide, they believe they can hide in plain sight. So I'll talk about technological threats first, then I'll talk a little bit about behavioral threats. First one on the technological threat side is customized malware and attacks make what we have characteristically used as a very common way to mitigate against malware, blacklisting, and signature detection as a component of any intrusion detection capability, makes it much less effective for us. So we expect to see much more on-the-fly, custom-generated malware. We're seeing it already. And what do we do to be able to respond? What can we possibly do? Reputation services are one way, we think, that can provide some help. We'll be able to, over time, get more sophisticated, not a new capability, a capability we are most recently widely deploying in the U.S. government spaces is federated whitelisting services. But also, and it's really come very much into prominent use. We're already seeing some use in corporations and certainly in government environments, and we expect this to become much more widespread. Trust foundations, we think, can help over the long term, but that takes time and commitment and investment in order to be able to successfully implement them and sustain them over time. So the next technological threat I'll talk about a little bit is this Internet of Things. Think about it. These non-person entities on the Internet. We've got cars on the Internet now. We've got all kinds of control systems, sensors, medical devices. And as we look at these entities on the Internet, joined in that, we have the potential to see much greater attacks, many more attacks being conducted that ultimately affect the physical world. These gizmos, by the way, provide easy avenues for access because many of them are not secured, and there's little incentive to many of the manufacturers to have to secure them. A really popular device that I see in use a lot now, and I use one but not the one I'm going to describe, is a pedometer. You think pedometer, that's easy. Put a pedometer on. It's a little simple device, tracks your steps. But there are many pedometers on the market today that have wireless capability. You can download information onto your computer. You can download to some remote service that can give you lots of cool data and statistics on how your walk's doing. Can beep you with some incentives to take a couple more steps, take the staircase instead of walking. You think that that's how dangerous can a pedometer be? Well, if it has the capability to be able to store data, has capability to be able to transmit, then it presents an opportunity for someone who would want to gain access to some environment. So the response for us, and my recommendation is that we would incentivize security. So think about it. From a current space, when you are trying to use electrical appliances, the underwriter's laboratory requires that you get this UL rating in order to be able to, and you can't even buy an electrical device now in the market, or not legally at least, without having an underwriter's laboratory rating. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, certifies aircraft. So aircraft can't go up unless they've had their FAA certifications. The Food and Drug Administration approves the use of medical devices as well as medical products for use. Maybe we should be looking at borrowing from that system in practice, whereby gadgets that sit on the net need some kind of resilience validation to provide some assurance that, such as in this physical world, this kind of thing really has been driven by government regulation, insurance industry requirements, or both. I would propose that there may be some space to begin thinking about some type of resiliency regulation for this Internet of Things, the things that reside on the Internet. Some level of assurance that there's been some type of look from a security perspective at the soundness and hardening of those devices. And then the second thought really is simplification. How complicated does my refrigerator really need to be? How many different buttons do I really need on the outside? But not just simplification from a user perspective, perhaps also from a perspective of protocols. simplified protocols for the internet-connected things, and then stringent validations for them. That would give us a fighting chance again of knowing what's on the net and having a level of assurance that what's out there has a purpose and is not being misused in any way. I couldn't not talk about technology, and I couldn't talk about technology and not talk about IPv6. What is it? It's the next generation of protocol for the internet. It is how data is the protocol is used to send data from one computer to another, and it contains things like addressing information, control information, in order to be able to route packets. Why are we moving there? Quite simply because we're getting full, right? So we need more space on the internet, and we also, by the way, can take advantage of IPv6 because we think we'll be able to have more efficient routing, more support for lots of mobile devices that exist in that environment, but there are challenges. And so from a threat perspective, again, it's a new attack surface. It's a new attack vector. Exploitation, stealth, all the things that you see listed there. And one of the biggest challenges for us, I believe, is that we generally don't have a community that is well informed and trained in defensive measures as it relates to IPv6. So we've got an effort back at NSA where we've developed some training modules. We're working with our defensive folks, help get them up to speed on what they need to understand and what needs to be in place. We are thinking about IPv6 from a security perspective, but there is a lot of work to be done, and I would really hope that places like this are taking a look at that as an opportunity. Ding, ding. So response is very simple: training for defenders and IT operators, getting coverage of IPv6, especially from a defensive perspective in colleges and universities, and then being very careful and selective in introducing IPv6 enabled capabilities into enterprise operations. You can't just do it all at once. You want to be able to test as you go to make sure the implementation is as secure as it can be. So one of the biggest requirements that I have in my role as the Information Assurance Director is to be able to provide secure mobile capabilities for classified information. That would be to be able to use a smartphone and a tablet for those customers who have a requirement to have access to classified information. You wouldn't think it would be so hard, but it is really, really, really hard for a variety of different reasons. So we're in the middle now of a pilot where we're testing a smartphone, a closed network for classified data and data and voice, and working with the Defense Information Systems Agency for the rollout of a limited enterprise capability by the end of this year. But mobility presents for us not just huge opportunities from a mission perspective to just be able to work more effectively, but tremendous threats. We're seeing more and more malware and mobile platform attacks over the past couple of years. And the use of mobile platforms really as an attack surface. We're hearing terms like the consumerization of IT, and that really is driving the heavy use of mobile devices as an enabler, a mission enabler, and also creating that new platform for adversaries. So the response, taking a hard look at core security functionality, not looking at mobility as only about the device that sits in your hand. It really is connected to an infrastructure, and the entire infrastructure has to be looked at hard to ensure that every part of it provides the best opportunity, and you take advantage of the best opportunity for security. Some of the things we care about a lot in that secure mobility space is data at rest protections. Very, very important for us. If you think about the clientele that we serve, many of whom we're going to have these mobile devices, not just in places like New York and Washington, but also in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. And I need to be able to provide a level of assurance to those customers that the information that they have on their devices is protected and that they're able to operate safely and securely in the missions that they have. Our thrust in the mobility space, specifically in response to that, is to look at using the cloud and virtualization as a mechanism so we can remove as much as we can from the end device and put it in a place that makes it accessible no matter where you are. But most importantly, if I use that device, if I lose that device, or it gets into hands of someone who doesn't deserve it, then I can cut it off and we can keep moving and I can get another one and I can still get access to my stuff and be able to do the work that I need. Mobile device management, critically important. Back to that, my cell phone is updated multiple times a day and I don't know about it. Well, here's the secret. If it's got classified data on it, I have to know about it, because if I don't, I might be coming to look for a job around here. So I gotta know about it, which means I've got to have some control over that device, over what goes into it, what comes out of it, what's connected to it. And so we're looking for innovative ways to help us in the area of mobile device management. The secure communications based on standards is critically important. We are advocating for the use of open standards, by the way, because using open standards that are available for anyone who wants to play in this environment gives us many more opportunities, gives industry many more opportunities to play. Proprietary standards don't provide that opportunity. It limits us to one place, one vendor, one type of solution. We want to be able to make as many solutions as we can available to as many as need it. I'd like to be able to put a menu of items before customers. Say, if you like this operating system, we can make that happen. If you like the other, we can make it happen. But that requires some cooperation. That is happening, by the way, across industry and government in order for us to get there. So now on to the behavioral threats. Faster pace as a threat. Well, you might think, what in the world could that possibly mean? So malware is being developed at a pace faster than ever before. Everything really in this malicious space is moving much more quickly. We're already seeing things like geographically distributed coordination of malicious attacks across the globe, and we are looking for much more of that to happen over time. And ultimately the entire life cycle, from the discovery of a vulnerability to the exploitation of that vulnerability by the adversary, has significantly decreased. That means we've got to be on our game all the time. We don't have time on our hands as it relates to finding a vulnerability and then developing a mitigation and deploying it before someone actually decides to use it to their advantage. So the response then, increased automation. That's a no-brainer, right? We need to get the humans out of the picture as much as possible as it relates to in the decision cycle of determining an action that needs to be taken. We use terms like cyber time and cyberspace. We need to be able to see a bad thing happen and make the appropriate decision and action consistent with our laws and authorities in order to protect the information that's critically important to us. So we're working hard on that automation space, but there is a lot more work to be done to automate everything from continuous monitoring, being able to look constantly and recognize, have the right profiles in place to be able to recognize when bad acts and activities come our way, to be able to put response actions in place as appropriate. We have to be able to use hardened, layered architectures to slow the attack. So here's the scenario. From my side of the business, we look at it in sort of three stages. The first is we are very much focused on hardening the infrastructure as much as we can. When I say the word hardening, I mean applying known solutions to known vulnerabilities. You might think that's easy. We kind of think it is. But it's really not so easy to implement because it costs, because there are decisions that have to be made in the decision cycle of IT professionals and senior managers about what to invest in next. But our firm belief is that if we're able to harden to the hilt, harden as much as we can based on what we know about vulnerabilities that exist in a given environment, that we can mitigate about 80% of the bad behaviors that are going on the internet, just simply by hardening. But there's still that 20% that we worry about a whole lot. That's a keep me up at night kind of 20%. And so we don't rely solely on the hardening as sufficient enough to protect us. We then do deploy sensors inside and outside of our environments, regularly looking, that's that continuous monitoring piece, regularly looking to see if there's any behaviors that are coming our way that don't belong or that are there that don't belong. And then we want to leverage all elements of national power to include working across government and industry and academia to make sure that we're collaborating, cooperating in the best ways possible in order to be able to have the best chance of keeping our networks and infrastructures as safe as they can be. So in this context of hardened layered architecture, we believe we can actually do this, by the way, with using commercial products and solutions, commercial solutions for classified, end-to-end, with vendor diversity, layering commercial products that comprise a given architecture or network construct. While each one of those components likely to have some vulnerability, and we expect that. The vulnerability may exist unintentionally, more likely than not, sometimes intentionally. But if we can layer those components in the right way, we think we can largely mitigate against the vast majority of the vulnerabilities. So using that, our hardened architecture, critically important. And then standardizing defensive information exchange. We are working on and have worked with some time with the National Institutes of Standards and many government and industry partners in the development of and use of security content automation protocols, SCAP, a language that allows defensive or components of an enterprise to be able to exchange information between them in a common language so that that information coming to my component is useful for me at the time that it's received because it's in a common language. We stood up a lab actually last October, partnership with industry, called the Trusted Network Connections Center, SCAP Demonstration Center, to actually bring industry and government together to be able to look at and test different capabilities in the standard space because it's so critically important that we can get those multiple components in the enterprise talking to each other in the same language. In the behavioral space, the next place I'd like to talk about is life cycle scope. So the supply chain or the introduction of malicious functionality, backdoor access, triggered disruptions as a result of supply chain. You know, this can be done, it can happen at multiple places in the development cycle. It can happen at the point of development. It can happen as packaging is being implemented. By the way, it can even happen after the product gets to a place that you might think would be safe, like on the shelf. So there are multiple, and then let's not even, we haven't even mentioned the fact that it can happen once you buy it and begin to use it or install it in a given infrastructure. So there are many points that the supply chain can be introduced. So we've already seen sporadic examples of this, mostly limited to the areas of software development and distribution channels. But this is really an example of where attackers are generally seeking to push compromise or access further back in the life cycle, further and further back in the life cycle. This is a difficult problem, admittedly a really difficult problem for us. It'll be a tremendous effort for us to be able to, and I would dare say an impossible effort for us to have a level of security as it relates to every single component that we might use in any system. I don't believe it can be done, and that's not where we should be putting our trust and confidence. That said, there's lots of efforts underway in the research arena, in hardware and software reverse engineering, to help understand how we might be able to better employ some capabilities in those spaces. There's the greater use of signed software, so as a solution space, having the software signed, we believe, is critically important. We are strongly advocating for software signing. And in the hardware space, still in the research stage, but there is some benefit, and we see specifically some benefit in the area of anti-counterfeiting efforts. And then I already talked to you about the layered solutions piece. My personal prediction, supply chain assurance will become a means for suppliers to differentiate or distinguish themselves, and that suppliers in some sectors will have to implement certain best practices in order to be competitive. And we look forward to seeing that. Another behavioral threat in the area of application focus. So the emerging threat, or at least a threat trend, is attacks focusing on application software. Currently on servers and workstations, we're starting to see it in the mobility space now, more and more later. Many third-party and independent application developers, we believe, don't have the resources or the wherewithal or the intent to be able to spend on what is needed to reduce vulnerabilities that many of the major platform defenders do. So vulnerability in apps are easy. We have apps developed. Some of you probably here in the room have developed apps. And even though the major distributors and the warehouses and libraries and entities that own the apps markets and manage them, they all have criteria to be able to gain entry, but we're not confident that that criteria includes the security threshold that we would be most comfortable with. So the response then is we need to make it easier for developers to write secure apps. So what does that mean? That means raising the bar on security. It means education and training. It means investing in those that are developing apps and making it easy. You know, I'd love to see, don't quote me on this, well, you probably will, intro to, app development as a gen ed requirement from a security perspective for all students coming into colleges and universities, some level of computer security 101, just to begin to plant the seed for that awareness and culture of security that we really need to permeate our entire world. And we need to make it harder for compromised apps to inflict harm across an entire platform. And so, in my space, the solution is fairly easy. I'm going to control the apps that come into the space that I'm responsible for. That gets to the mobile device management piece, but everybody can't do that. And so we need some standards and some norms that are just required for application developers and application users and those that would make them available to us as a public so that we all can have a greater level of assurance that what we're using has gone through some level of rigor from a security perspective. You think about what you do on your mobile devices. You're not, certainly your personally identifiable information, your financial information, and all subject to an application, the origin of which you don't know. Don't really know what you downloaded, what you really got. On the counter-attack culture, this is really the belief by some organizations or individuals that counter-attacking is a viable response to a cyber intrusion. Why is this dangerous? The chances of useful behavior changes really are pretty small. The chance of serious unintended consequences is pretty high. And the counterattack is essentially never really a viable response, in my view, for an individual target. There are also consequences, some of which we are just beginning to explore in the context of what's acceptable in cyberspace. What are the norms? Are there international norms? And should there be for acceptable behavior in cyberspace? So the response for us, we think, is education. Attribution is difficult, by the way, and that gets to the anonymity that the internet provides. Education about liability issues, certainly clearer laws and international norms, and then most importantly, those partnerships so that we can have a trust factor across sectors, those of us that are dependent on products and services, and those that are developing and delivering them. Nation-state actors. Nation-state actors, and when I specifically speak of nation-state actors, I'm talking about those that have a level of sophistication that far exceeds somebody in their garage, playing around and trying to do something bad on the internet. These many nation-state actors today, emerging capabilities, significant capabilities, sophisticated capabilities, growing in speed and volume and capability and intent against a broad spectrum of historically non-traditional targets. And so while these nations have engaged in espionage forever, really, many, many, many years, we're starting to see nation-state resources and expertise employed in what we would characterize as reckless and disruptive, destructive behaviors. If you recall back during the Cold War, blocks of nations worked against each other. We know the history of that. But there was a sense of rules and restraint, even in that space, even between rival organizations or nations. Some of today's national cyber actors don't seem to be bound by any sense of restraint. No recognition of respect or norms or interest in that. And those responsible are clearly working against the best interest of the global community, including the long-term interests of all of us here. So we can only speculate on their rationale, but the trend exists and we have to be prepared for it and think that it will get worse, because I believe that it will. So what do we respond? So no individual business, no individual university, or even no individual government has the means to defend itself alone. We're in this together as a team, and it's only, in my view, through unity of effort, all of us working together, that we have a fighting chance. Next, the cloud. Let's talk about the cloud. Move to something a little bit more pleasant here, the cloud. So what are the threats? So there's a lot of talk today about the cloud and security in the cloud and use of the cloud and can we trust it and is it safe? So here's what I tell you. NSA has done a tremendous amount of work on the cloud. We have implemented our own cloud. And so we've done that certainly from a perspective of efficiency. Many efficiencies we've gained. But by the way, security is right there beside it. So we have done tremendous amount of work on the security of the cloud. And our perspective is, first of all, certainly the efficiencies notwithstanding, that we believe we'll be able to do things from a security perspective we have never been able to do because of that. Now, you may say to me, and someone probably will, well, but you put all your eggs in one basket, you become a big fat old target. Check, we got that. But we believe there are things that we can do that allow us to be able to defend that big fat old target in ways that we have never been able to do, particularly in a distributed environment that we live in today. So we're excited about the possibility, but there are threats that are posed from it. And I've listed them there. Certainly co-opting of cloud resources, using them in order to be able to launch and have engines behind the malicious activities that are ongoing. And attackers, bad guys purchasing cloud resources because almost anybody can buy cloud resources in today's environment. So what's the response? Ultimately, in the long term, we have to look at ways to extend trust up from the hardware into those cloud-borne applications and workloads. And this ultimately, we believe, will make it harder for attackers to be able to steal the resources, easier for targets to distinguish legitimate cloud transactions from malicious ones. But this is going to be challenging because we've got work to do in understanding this space and managing it in the right way. Standards and best practices. We talked about continuous monitoring. I'll keep talking about that. That's critical because we can't trust that whatever measures we put in place will be sufficient. Extensions of trust foundations into the cloud environment that allow us to do things like tag data and have people credentials so that anyone who wants to have access to information in the cloud has to be legitimized by the individual and then legitimized have access to that specific piece of data. And we need a means for, by the way, extending reputation services into cloud-based services. And there's lots of research and development going on in that space, and I think lots of opportunity over time to be able to make some progress there. I talked a little bit, but I thought important to just call out, and from a security in the cloud perspective, these are some of the things that we think are really important. Separate accreditation of that cloud infrastructure, flexible accreditation for the cloud infrastructure. We need accreditation based on continuous monitoring so that we have a good understanding of what we're seeing and be able to respond appropriately. And then cloud security services as a business line. We shouldn't necessarily be separating security from IT. It ought to be an integral part of it, a standard component of any infrastructure that chooses to go in that space. So, future of cyber defense. Not surprisingly, in today's world, national security systems are fundamentally dependent on commercial infrastructure. We've talked about that before. So we have to be able to respond to this by working hard to transform our business model into one that continues to encourage us to partner and team with industry and academia. I think we're on a really good path towards that. We have to be able to share information in real time, and that's just not government to government. That's government with industry, with academia, so that when we are collectively as a body all looking, we need to get to a point where we're collectively able to share what we see and be able to use that information to our own good to protect the things that matter most to us. We have work to do in the area of laws and policies and standards and norms. I've talked about that a little bit already. There was great energy around legislative discussions about cyber policy this year. We haven't gotten there yet. I'm convinced that we will. Back when I was at the White House 12 years ago, we weren't talking about this. It is music to my ears to hear legislators talking about cybersecurity. And so I believe over time we're going to get the right policies and norms and laws in place to enable us to do all that we need in this critical space. And then we've got to build and continue to build and invest in the cyber workforce. And NSA is very much committed to that. You heard about many of the areas that we're invested in just in this university alone, some of which I got to hear about for the first time. I hadn't heard about the program for high school students, girls. That's Girls Rule. That's cool. Really exciting work that we're doing with this university as well as many others across the nation, really trying to raise the bar. We have programs where we bring folks onto our campus during the summertime and expose them to opportunities to be able to see the types of challenges that we have, encourage them to think about some of the tough challenges and come back into the academic environment and look for ways that we can advance in those spaces. My conclusion, no big surprise, there's a broad spectrum of new and growing threats. They keep me up at night. Yeah, that really does, it really does worry me. But I am encouraged by the great energy that I see expended towards these many challenges and problems. And effective response strategies really have to look at it both from a defender and an attacker perspective at the same time. And by the way, we often talk at NSA, look at ways to move people across those mission areas in order to be able to take advantage of, defenders think one way, and those that are on the exploitation side think one way. And what a novel idea to be able to move folks across those mission areas and have that thinking, the missions benefit by that new thinking. But the most effective responses, I firmly believe, is when we're able to have government and industry and academia working together. And ultimately, it's the unity of effort of all of us working together that I believe will allow us to have the greatest success in this space that we call cyber. So it's been my great pleasure to be here with you today. And are we taking questions? I don't know. No questions? No, only kidding. No.